We're in 2025, that is to say the 10th year of the sofa, and also the last year of the original plan. No, I'm not going anywhere, assuming I'll continue to be alive, that is, but the original plan from 2015 is slowly coming to an end, and we're entering the territory of there be dragons. Well, no, not really, but whatever, something has to change. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative in the year 2025, which is the 10th year of this channel. I hope you had a blessed Christmas and a wonderful New Year's Eve party. Now, I came up with the name Freedom Alternative in February 2015 and published the first video in June 2015 after multiple attempts at finding a way to do it while avoiding the pitfalls that were fashionable around those times and within the constraints of those times. This year's January 1st video will be much longer than usual, in part because it's the 10th year and in part because I simply have more things to announce. Now, with your permission, before going to the usual part where I disclose what's in the bag for this year, I'd like to take a moment to reflect a little bit, which is something I avoid doing on this channel because, well, first of all, nobody cares and there's already enough slop of this kind on the internet anyway, but I'll still do it. Nevertheless, 10 years is still a long time on the internet, and while there's many things that I got wrong, there must be enough things that I got right, given that I'm still around and haven't succumbed to the common pitfalls that have been experienced by the content creators that were fashionable in late 2014 and early 2015 when I was researching to see whether it's worth getting into this to begin with or not. 100% of the people I looked into 10 years ago and took inspiration from on various facets of what has now become the Freedom Alternative Network fit one of the following four categories. 1. They got tired and deleted their channels, some even without notice and without any trace. 2. They gotten straight up crazy, either politically, defending Hamas, really? Or they've gotten crazy in more psychiatric terms. And I would rather not give examples. Category 3, they got caught up in irrelevant drama or grievance and stayed there because it was financially profitable. Or category 4 went the internet grifter route, in which one basically says nearly the same things over and over again because, hey, content is king. Am I right? Now, do keep in mind that this is not a critique per se. I certainly understand all of the four categories. Heck, I wanted to delete this channel at some point. People do change over time and their interests change too. And some people get sick, including psychiatrically. It happens. I am, however, less empathetic to the third category, but that's because one thing that stayed consistent with me over the last 30 years almost, since I've been on the internet, is that drama is a no-go. I don't want to be the guy in the duty calls meme, no matter how profitable that may be. Life is way too short to be wasted arguing with people I don't know over the internet, although I admit it's tempting. And while I understand that content is king, I would rather maintain quality than expand the quantity while accepting the trade-offs that do come with this stance, which is slower growth, less money, and so on and so forth, and definitely less fame, which is actually a positive trade-off for me. I'm okay with that because, again, life is too short to be spent making reaction videos to every single minute thing that comes up in order for the line to go up. Not to mention that there is the danger of audience capture. Sometimes you get things wrong, especially if you react to things too fast. Besides, it's better to have one or two videos about a thing that are those videos that end up being simply good enough to be quoted years down the line. In the closing weeks of 2024, I found myself quoting videos from 2015 on certain topics that were still very much unchanged. Like the video "Most of My Childhood is Now Illegal." That video is still good enough today for the exact same argument. Why would I make another one? Just so the line goes up and content is king? I'd rather not do that. Similarly, in the last 3 or 4 months of 2024, I was informed several times by people in several countries about how they use my videos in classrooms, both formally and informally, as a setting, to teach about various topics. That, to me, is far more valuable than virality. Just like I appreciate when one of our talking points become a normative one, especially when that happens with the opposition. And the best moments in the last 10 years have always been the emails and sometimes the approaches on the street from regular people who told me how they changed their minds on something important due to the didactic and thorough way of presenting things here. Or sometimes how I helped people change their life or made their family better. Now that is a bit worrying in a way. I mean, I'm just a guy on the sofa at the end of the day. Now, I'm not going to claim that I or we got everything right. It's a tough balance to strike between being somewhat entertaining, avoid taking oneself too seriously, but still remain on point. And I'm very sure we didn't strike that balance every time. Maybe even not most of the time. Still, writing scripts beforehand instead of just turning on the camera and ranting helped a lot, and it's still helping, in the quest to avoid skidding into babbling. Putting a lot of thought into what comes out and putting order in those thoughts before the first second of video is recorded tended, over the long run, not only to help with the quality of the delivery, but also with maintaining focus. Now, all of this is to say that the reason I can afford to say we sometimes is because this way of doing things is still attractive. And in time, enough people were attracted that now I can say Freedom Alternative Network with a straight face and be both proud and grateful to all of the people who have chosen to get involved into forwarding now our ideas, and rather than forwarding a specific person, namely yours truly. With some twists and turns, this is largely what I had in mind. A loose network of people with only a light touch coordination, each doing what he or she knows best to forward ideas and policies that are conducive to a freer people. That was the plan I was alluding to 10 years ago. And it kind of worked. But we're also fastly approaching some inherent limitations, which is why the plan was for around 10 years, at the end of which I would rather give up in case of failure or come up with a new framework if things go well. And in reality, we're somewhat closer to things going well than to failure, so I won't give up, but the limitations that are slowly becoming apparent were only partially predictable in 2015, which means the task going forward is going to be harder than what I imagined even semi-success would have looked like 10 years ago. For instance, I predicted that attention spans will worsen, but I didn't predict just how bad algorithmic enshittification will rot the brains of so many people. The Q&A that we did in the last week of 2024 on the Romanian channel was just the latest clue, and one of the reasons this concerns me is because one of the long-term objectives is to build an alternative elite. And with so many people's brains fried, that's not an easy task. Frankly, it's not disinformation that concerns me. I mean, that has always been a thing and will continue to be a thing and will be with us forever and ever till the end of time. And heck, there's 100 or 200 years old disinformation that is still with us. It's slop that concerns me. And while I cannot change the world, I can definitely control what I do and can at least try to continue to be a positive influence to a few people. So that's why I intend to maintain course, as tempting as it may be, to switch to worse under the guise of adapting. Speaking of adapting, I predicted correctly a re-Balkanization of the internet, but now in 2025 I have to also make decisions that will piss off some people. Essentially, the era of accommodating everyone is slowly coming to an end. In the last 6 months, I've spent more time on community management than on making videos, and that will have to change. But more on that in a few minutes. In the meantime, there's one more thing I need to say on this reflective stage. The exercise of herding cats is hard, which is both good news and bad news. The good news is that this means the people we do end up convincing of something will be sturdy and resilient people who will be able to withstand adversity and do the right thing when it's unpopular, like we've seen during the pandemic project. And yes, this is a shout out to all of the people who are inspired in full or partially by our actions to continue to work well into 2025 towards the goal of punishing those at fault for the pandemic project. Only now, years later, are the normies finally realizing that us, the crazies, not only had a point, but we were correct in totality about the negative effects of the pandemic project, ranging from mental health to economics and to public policy. We won't be able to punish them all, but punishing as many as possible is a very worthy and achievable goal. Just as I'm recording this, yet another former Minister of Health somewhere in Europe during the pandemic project is getting ready for a lengthy prison sentence. Delivering justice matters, and now, delivering it now in a timely manner, not in 2035 or 2050, when nobody cares anymore. Delegitimizing public health matters now. The faster we help dismantle the tools that made the pandemic project possible in the first place, the better it is for the future of our freedom. Which is why I'm so happy with the ever-increasing backlash against doctors as people, but also very grateful to the ones closer to the sofa who decided to get into the system and start helping wrecking it from the inside. I know this sounds a bit conspiratorial, but then again, to a certain extent, it really is. We really did talk among each other on ways to get our people within the system with a mission to both punish those at fault and sabotage public health in general and make it easier for more people to see that the authority of public health and experts writ large is wholly illegitimate and evil. So there's that. And for the rest of the decade, I hope we will be able to grow more such people. That's what I mean by growing an alternative elite. The videos here are just one of the tools, not an end in and of itself. Just like the websites, the meetings, and all of the rest of the activities around are also tools, not an end in and of themselves. And this will have to be reinforced in the coming years as way too many people, and including and especially the younger ones, have become excessively hyper-focused and, quite frankly, genuinely unable to see bigger pictures anymore. And it starts with the small things. Here's an example of small things. A few years ago, I wanted to implement emails to use both for the closest members and in institutional communications, like when requiring journalist accreditation to various institutions, FOIA requests, and so on and so forth. It just looks better to be in a format of @freedomalternative.com. I inquired about how to go about this since there's so many techies everywhere anyway. Every single one of them proposed ways to go about it that would have taken days or even weeks to set up, and then afterwards left us unguarded to unexpected updates that could bork everything and bring in more problems. After 3 days of back and forth with that, I went on and implemented an old-style solution of my own, which took 1 hour to set up and has had 0 glitches in the almost 7 years that have passed since that moment. It was nothing special, and the only reason people who are in theory more knowledgeable than me at this failed to come up with this solution is the same reason why expert opinion should be heard, but expert rule should be utterly rejected. Experts today reflexively come up with solutions that make themselves more useful and necessary, routinely at the expense of both public and private good, and at the expense, routinely, of what's correct. And I want this to continue to be my contribution in a small way, always coming up with ways of doing things that make me redundant. And the reason I'm telling this story is because some of the changes I want internally in 2025 are exactly about that, how to make me less necessary in some of the activities, particularly community management, and all in such a way that it does not increase the workload on anyone else, and also without having to hire a community manager. I mean, even if we could afford that, I would rather spend that money on something more useful than repetitive pseudo-managerial tasks. I'm serious. All right, so with all of that long-winded introduction out of the way, here's what's in the bag for 2025. Let's start with the so-called internal kitchen stuff. Number one, a single distribution channel. As I was saying, the era of communicating and accommodating everyone is coming to an end. For the sake of everyone's convenience, I have, in the last 4 or 5 years, been accommodating all sorts of demands, and while some of them turned out to be good ideas, the vast majority of them only ended up increasing my workload on community management to the detriment of the more important activities, which is lobbying, shilling, research, and making videos. The biggest headache is with distributing donors-only content or other paywalled content. Some don't want to create an account for privacy reasons. More recently, I got whining that even torrent is no longer good enough because potato. Why don't you do this instead of that? Is the kind of question that I've simply grown tired of. Especially given that the solution offered effectively amounts to even more work or more money spent, and quite frankly, more autism. 2 years ago, I set out the objective to reduce time spent with communications overall, and that worked out just fine. A bit of whining at first, but then almost everyone got used to the fact that there is one way, a procedure to contact me, and that's it. So, drawing from that success, I'll soon brute force a way that unifies the patchwork for the distribution of paywalled and donors-only content, but also a lot of internal communication, which includes most other circles as well. Individually, each argument has merit, but when taken together, accommodating all of the positions is now untenable. The network has grown big enough that the current patchwork doesn't cut it anymore. And drawing from the experience with the email thingy that I mentioned just earlier, after 3 days of consulting, I came up with something that's good enough and can be forked in a very reasonable amount of time and without increasing the overall bill too much. Yeah, there were some trade-offs, like needing about a day to come up with a simple mail transfer protocol server in order to avoid paying IT grifters more than just to send occasional automatic emails than for the hosting itself. And many thanks to Mr. RP for helping with the whole process. We make a very good team. We achieved in under a week what we initially thought would take 3 weeks or more. So, because initially I thought it would take 3 weeks or more, I had a longer transition in mind. But then I realized that since we were able to build most of it faster, the longer this drags on, the worse it is for everyone. In Romanian, we do have a say, long sickness guaranteed death. So the transition will be swift. By the end of this week, almost everyone who supports this project financially or logistically will be invited, and most of the current patchwork will be disabled. It will be one website for all the member stuff. Communication, as in live chat, polls, expenses transparency, internal announcements, forums, pretty much everything except the ticketing system. For now, I'd like to keep that separate. Posting separately on Subscribestar and Patreon and Telegram and private messages and email, this has become untenable. And it has resulted in either ignoring some of our supporters or in needless arguments. Now again, I'm not really complaining. This is a great problem to have. The current patchwork was put together in April 2020 as a way to coordinate financial support for the multiple sub-projects that we engaged in during the pandemic project. And from there, it evolved into a structure that worked just fine as long as all or most were willing to be on Telegram or were willing to stay out of the loop with certain things. When it was 30 people, that was manageable. When it's approaching 200 and with 2 tiers, no longer that easy. Again, I'm not complaining, but I'm coming up with a trade-off that removes a lot of repetitive admin workload off from me so I can do what our supporters want in the first place. And all while maintaining some of the more quirky standards that I practice, like maintaining a certain level of transparency about the expenses. I don't know how many do this, but I too like to believe that it's the reason why we still retain small donors from 2015. And I also know I don't present as much gratitude as I should. This solution, while by no means perfect, accommodates those who can't or won't be on Telegram, removes the need to scroll too much to find older content, But the trade-off will be that you will need an account, which means I will need an email address. I know some won't like this, but it is what it is. The goal is simple. I want to post in one place instead of 3, 4, 5, or sometimes even more in some cases. That platform that I'm talking about is almost done. Some of you have already started using it in the closing days of 2024, and by the end of this week, I hope I'll be able to announce it more broadly. Ideally, the whole change is fully implemented by the end of this month at the latest. Most likely in 2 weeks, because I also need to be somewhere else in the second half of the month, also in your interest. We'll see what happens. But suffice to say, the decision has been made, status currently being implemented. Number 2, increased focus on physical stuff. With communication more automated, I will want more physical connections this year. Not only because way too many lack that, although that's an issue in and of itself, but also because we haven't been living up properly to element number 4 from our values and the general philosophy. This is a shift I've been wanting to push since last year, but 2024 has already been a very busy year. Still, this is way too important to continue to be postponed. Moreover, I will personally start to discriminate against those who eschew physical meetings, eschew having fun in the real world, and worst of all, eschew useful activities in the real world, like filing FOIA requests, contribute to investigations, nag MPs, and so on and so forth. Ever since the end of the pandemic project, we've been quite intentional about shedding people whose only contribution was being loudmouths online. Again, the purpose of the network is not to have 1 million views on YouTube. The purpose of the network is to advance a freedom-oriented alternative view to the current status quo in as many places as possible. And being a loudmouth exclusively online is nowhere near as helpful, no matter how much your algorithmically enshittified stats tell you otherwise. Legislation, public policy, human connections, and good old-fashioned fun, all of these highly useful things are achieved exclusively or primarily through offline means. So, do you want more? You do more. Yes, you personally. We already had a low tolerance for the peanut gallery, especially for the spurging out part of the peanut gallery, but I think we haven't made our point thoroughly enough. We're open to help, we're open to be nice, heck, we'll be your friend too, but not at the expense of our mental health and most definitely not with limitless tolerance. Help yourself in order to be helped, as is the motto of one organization in another lifetime I used to run. Number 3, more attention given to concern trolling and time wasters. While we've been doing a very good job overall, all things considered, at keeping such elements away, and I have a long list of people to whom we need to be grateful for that, it's time to start applying the same standard to the public arena as well. In every country, there are a few, usually anonymous, accounts whose sole purpose is to waste people's time. They talk the language of liberty or conservatism, but when the time comes for action, they're quiet or signal towards the regime, or try to stop any discussion or action that may harm the regime with all sorts of concern trolling. The latest example of successfully countering this occurred just 3 weeks ago when, again, thanks in part to the core people of our network, but also others who realized in time that the sofa guys may be crazy, but they're also right. This is what happened. The regime in Romania, through its numerous army of shills, tried really hard to prevent any discussion about how that guy from Sibiu being illegitimate, or the fact that the Russians were in fact that guy's political party, using all sorts of all the tools from the playbook, essentially, from concern trolling, legalese nonsense, name-calling, pathetic attempts at guilt by association. It took a lot of real-life work to break through the barrage and release the cascade preference. And it worked. In the closing days of 2024, quite literally, our memes were the mainstream conversation. But we have to build on that, ideally through a manual on how to spot these people and how to thwart them. At least on this side of politics, anyway. This is a challenge I believe we, at the Freedom Alternative Network, are almost uniquely capable of facing. Those of you who've been briefed on what actual Russian disinformation looks like long before it became mainstream have gathered years of experience on how to spot those who waste the time of their audience. Now, this project is in part self-interested. I would rather people watch videos that make them more confident or at least slightly better informed than content that is effectively panic porn that is intentionally designed to keep them demoralized and scared. But it's also a wider interest at play as well. In a few short years, we will need to effect changes, especially here in Europe, that will require an alternative elite. Some of that will have to be recruited from among the people currently sweating on Russian or Chinese-inspired panic porn. The more people we get off that shit, the better for all of us. This is true in every single country of Europe. And I want this year to have a manual on how to do this based on the experience of those of us who have already done this. This will be the battle for the rest of the decade. Not AI-driven disinformation or TikTok or whatever the regime is currently discussing. Yes, those are an issue as well, but nowhere near as important as the amount of time being wasted by good people who don't know better. Yes, it will be a nasty thing, but it's also necessary. And speaking of TikTok, number 4, we now have a TikTok channel. At Freedom Alternate, just like the handle on X. Everyone who wants to contribute is invited to the working group. I won't be running it personally for obvious reasons. Still, if we can break through the panic porn over there, even to one person, it's worth a shot. The account is experimental, so from our perspective, there aren't many rules. And with that, let me finally move to the usual announcements. Well, told you it would be long. So, in the order of difficulty, number 1, Propaganda Basement. The 4th season is already finished and available on our platform and in the donor circle, and I'll start publishing it here from January the 9th, and then 1 episode per week every Thursday until it runs out, which is somewhere in the middle of April. It is entirely about Chinese propaganda. I believe the discussion about Russian propaganda has kind of run its course at this point, just like the sofa was early in bringing up Russian subversion before the normies had any idea about it. I think it's time to talk about Chinese subversion as well, especially since it's more insidious, much better funded, and instead of drugs and ignorance, it is aimed at the so-called well-educated people. Smart thing from the CCP, figuring out that most well-educated Westoids are very, very dumb people. So we'll spend some time reading Chinese newspapers aimed at Westerners. You'll be surprised how much seemingly Western propaganda is in fact very much Chinese and serving Chinese interests. You just need to know where to look. Moreover, one of the things I want to do in the second half of this month is to film the 5th season of the Propaganda Basement, also in English, this time focusing on the so-called Global South. The overall point will have to prove that there is no such thing as a Global South, and the easiest way to do it is to go through the official propaganda of several Global South countries, or at least who consider themselves that, like Laos, or Ecuador, or Colombia, or Serbia. This will be harder to produce because I have to do translations from Spanish or Serbian, but I really want to do it because the idea of a global south will be pushed harder on the European public in the coming years, and I see none of these so-called disinformation experts even having an idea on how to counteract this in a way that is meaningful and doesn't simultaneously serve the regime. I don't know yet whether I'll shove it all in one single season or make separate seasons, but I do know that the first episodes from Season 5 of Propaganda Basement will be filmed this month. More details in ticket number 337, available to the members of the donor circle. Alright, number 2. The Khmer series. Episodes 4 and 5 are already written, but the shit show of the Romanian presidential elections, plus the issue that I spoke of earlier, with too much time being eaten up by community management, has postponed this for longer than it should have been. Still, I'll have to catch up, and I will. I'm looking forward to tell you the story of Dysfunctional Random, otherwise known as Cambodia, and in the process likely get myself on a list of undesirables, as it's illegal in Cambodia to mock these kinds of things. But I'll do it anyway because that's the reason you support this project, to tell you the truth even when it's really not convenient. Also, the story of the Pol Pot nightmare, I mean, man, that's tough, even by commie dictatorship standards. I'll go with an angle I was unable to find somewhere else, because again, you wouldn't send me elsewhere if I tell you the same stories you can already find elsewhere. Speaking of elsewhere, number 3, Latin American politics. Now, the way the series from Latin America will look like is not fully decided yet, but I'll have to decide that soon. Ideally, I'll avoid telling the same stories twice, because the 5th season of Propaganda Basement is in part based on material that I gathered during the trip in Southeast Asia, as well as the trip in Latin America. And oh boy, there's so many stories to tell. Now, if all goes right, I'll tell most of them this year. Again, I'd rather put more thought into it rather than deliver something incomplete just to fit the timeline. And speaking of incomplete, number 4, Central Asia Part 2. None of the series so far have gotten so much positive feedback as the one from Central Asia. In a way, that came as a surprise, as it was the first series that I made under the new format, which takes much longer to produce and runs counterintuitive to the internet trends of these days. However, the product was not just appreciated but already used in classrooms and research, and asked when is the part 2 coming, since it doesn't thoroughly cover all of Central Asia. Well, I'll do just that. Not exactly a surprise, since I already announced it somewhere buried on the website, but in a few days I'm publishing the details and start the fundraiser. Because there's also a financial reason for why I'm doing this year. It's the cheapest option from the available ones, and it's also the least risky from a security standpoint. Debatable on that. And with Tajikistan being in the news for its supposedly Kemalist measures and also at crossroads with its leadership, I think it can provide a lot of value to the forefront of geopolitical analysis. Not to mention that we get to test some of the predictions made in 2022 and 2023 about Central Asia. Let's see what went wrong and what went right. Ultimately, the reason I get more things right than wrong is not because I have a crystal globe, but because I actually go there. With the risk of being cringe, I will say it. I go there because I can't trust journalists to inform me. Heck, as time goes on, these kinds of series and videos will become even more important as inauthentic slop becomes increasingly common. I do hope you will support this effort. I haven't been in such good spirits about a potential tour since I did Sweden in 2020, which also ended up being better received than I had expected. Number 5. 3 Seas Initiative Summit, Warsaw. Now, this one is harder to talk about right now, in part because the organizer got changed almost literally overnight. Since 2023, it was established that in 2024 it will be held in Vilnius, which happened, and in 2025 in Budapest. But somewhere in 2024, suddenly it's announced that it will be Warsaw at the end of April, and it's increasingly likely that President Trump will be there too. Which could mean something important will be decided, or it could mean that Orban simply renounced the organizing for whatever reason, or maybe the organizing was simply taken away from Hungary due to Orban's excessive friendliness towards Russia. I don't know. Quite literally, let's explore. And the good news is that we already have some contacts in Poland, so getting accreditation should not be too difficult. I will recognize that the expense is not negligible, but with this unexpected change of the host and the possibility of being there with Trump's team is way too tempting not to at least try to attend. So yeah, send me to Poland, I guess. Besides, if this does pan out, I could also finally do a video again in person with Mr. Lloyd de Jong. And there are other surprises that I do have in mind since 2022 for the next visit to Poland. So this unexpected change could turn out to be a blessing in disguise. Not gonna lie. And finally, number 5, which is more like a wish than a possibility of actually being able to do this in 2025, but I really need some major tech upgrade. You see, I don't share the enthusiasm of the rest of the bubble over Elon's buying of X. It was clearly a good thing for freedom of expression, but it's not the silver bullet. This channel continues to be suppressed, Facebook continues to be a censorious shithole, and just in the last 3 months alone we changed more minds via stuff shared on our website than via social media in the whole of 2024. So while I'm not excessively optimistic that we'll be able to afford this in the current year, it's still something that needs to be done. We need our own multi-purpose server. That's hard and expensive, but it must be done. In fact, quite a few pressing matters have piled up already, largely because for reasons of budgetary constraints, I have neglected or postponed issues that should have been addressed 2 or 3 years ago. Like, for instance, replacing this camera, or finally getting a wireless street microphone. Most of the improvements over the tech side have come at the expense of more work from me correcting stuff in post-production. Audio has been mostly seamless for many years now, but that resulted in a workflow that makes editing these videos a huge pain. So it came at the expense of me. The workhorse computer for this operation is now 11 years old. It still works, and I fully do expect it to continue to work for another year, but its lifetime is coming to an end. 12 years is kind of the average time that I keep a computer. Slower or faster, I will have to start to want to fix these things. It will contribute to freeing up more of my time to do what's needed, rather than more admin work. I don't know if I mentioned it, I'm sick of admin work. Well, other than that, it will be more business as usual. I fully do expect to be able to continue the quasi-weekly Podcast the Weekend series on the Romanian channel. Next episode is number 234, will be filmed this Sunday, and it will feature some new equipment and some experimentation, not to mention that I will try to push it through the new members platform. We'll hit at least episode 250 this year, and I still can't believe the success of that podcast. But then again, the best ideas turn out to be those that aren't taken the most seriously. One major failure for 2024 was that I didn't make any Knowing Romania episodes. I almost edited one of them. Turns out that organizing was a bitch, after all, exactly what I was afraid of on January the 1st, 2024, and it was an even bigger bitch than I expected. But there's so little time and so many things to do that even dwelling on the failures feels like a waste of time. So I'll stop here. It's enough, given that the January 1st video is usually short, or at least shorter. In the end, I want to thank everyone for their patience. Also, many thanks for everyone's involvement in our projects in 2024, especially our donors. We couldn't have done most without you. And again, I don't always express enough gratitude, and I hope all of you will stay with us for the year that is just now starting. And with that, I think it's time to wrap this up. Thank you all for watching. I wish you all a happy new year. Don't forget to subscribe, visit our website regularly, maybe give a shekel and join the members site. And I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.